and expand people's thinking about what economies can look like in a healthy and positive way. And I think that diversity in the economic system can help create the conditions for a healthier expression of capitalism than what we have now.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce herself. Jeanné, please go ahead.
Thank you, Maurice. Wonderful to meet all of you today. My name is Jeanné Lewis, and I'm the CEO of Faith in Public Life. And we are a national organization based in Washington, D.C., but we work with faith leaders across the country from a variety of faith traditions to help them lift their voices in service of the common good. As for myself, I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area, and many people don't think that folks are from D.C. or that they stay here, but there are lots of us here. And I always like to start by sharing that I come from a family of very inspiring women who taught me about service and love and courage and faith. And one of them, my Aunt Maxine, often reminds me when we're engaging with people from different faith traditions that we shouldn't look at what's different from ours, but look for what is the same. And I think that sums up how I approach most things in my life: my faith, my family, my work, my service. As for my faith tradition, I am a cradle Catholic, Roman Catholic, but I think that a more accurate description of me is a Christian mystic. So I find deep wisdom in the church and across faith traditions. And I think I'm always looking for what is true everywhere, what is the same. And to me, that's a reflection of who God is in our lives. And that's led me to a bunch of values that drive my life and drive everything that I do. And I think first and foremost is this belief that we're all beloved children of God. And Jesus is my focal point, but I also believe that every human being has dignity and is made in the image and likeness of God. So I'm always looking for how can I help people be more empowered and claim that identity as God's beloved child? How can I bring honesty and transparency and courage and wisdom into the world? And I also draw a lot of inspiration from two African traditions, Ubuntu and Sankofa. Ubuntu is an idea that we are in relationship with one another and we need each other. Our existence is intimately connected to everyone around us. And Sankofa is about remembering where we come from, even as we move forward, and that there's always wisdom from the past that can help us move forward in life. So leading faith in public life allows me to exercise these values and do work that reminds all of us every day that God loves us and that we should make policies and build systems and treat each other as if that's the truth, because it is.
Jeanné, tell us a bit about your upbringing. You were born as well in DC, so we understand now how faith, how that plays a role. But when you look back at your youth, when did it start to play a role? How was that? And how did it ultimately made it who you are today and how you work and how you think?
Yeah, I always found myself in this bridge building space or in between space. So I was raised Catholic, but until I was in the 6th grade, I went to Baptist school. I grew up in the suburbs in a very diverse, racially diverse neighborhood, but my high school was predominantly white in the city. And so I often found myself, even as a child, in these places where I was navigating between different worlds or different perspectives, and I gravitated towards roles where I could help people find connections with each other, even when they didn't think they had a connection. And often those connections help us find new solutions or a new path. So my career has reflected that as well. It's been sort of eclectic, but it makes sense in retrospect. So I started as a faith-based community organizer, and I have a master's degree in peace building and conflict resolution, which I also studied a little bit internationally as well. I've done some work with elected officials to help them understand racism and how it impacts policy and people's daily lives. But I've also worked with military families. So I've done a lot of different things, but all of this work, whether I was looking at racial groups or religious groups, it was about connecting people across those groups for shared purpose and improving their community. And so Faith in Public Life is a natural fit because our country needs our faith traditions right now to remind us of our shared values and remind us how we can work together for the common good to transcend the current divides that we have.
You know, when you look back at you know, your youth and children that other children you played with, has there been maybe a moment or a memory where, you know, that is really significant to ultimately where you know, what you chose to study?
Yeah, I think there has been. So, as I said, I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood, racially diverse, and until I was in the ninth grade, I was going to school with people from many different places. So, some of my friends, their parents and their grandparents were immigrants from the Philippines. I had other friends who were African immigrants. I had friends who were biracial, other African Americans like myself, white folks. So there's a wide variety of people. And I remember just the privilege of growing up and visiting my friends' homes, having sleepovers or birthday parties, and meeting their relatives or eating different types of food from different places, hearing people speak different languages. And that was very formative for me. I didn't realize how much it was until I became an adult and I visited other places. My first job was in Central Florida, which is a very segregated community. And while there are many different types of people there, people sort of stay to their own group, if you will. And I felt viscerally how different that community was from how I grew up, just being exposed and welcomed and welcoming to people from all these different places. And that connection helped me realize that the place where I grew up is a reflection of a beloved community and an ideal community where we're learning from each other and accepting one another. And I felt very strongly that I wanted to help other people have that experience too.
And Jeanné, I mean, you just told me that you know, you after a period of 9 months being the interim executive director, you're now, or you will be, you know, the actual executive director. So congratulations with that. That's great. And the question that I have for you is, yeah, how do you hope that X number of years from now, when you look back and at your work, you know, with your organization, what you would have done?
I'm very excited about Faith in Public Life's future. And we are working on the finishing touches right now of our strategic plan. But when I reflect on what I hope will accomplish at Faith in Public Life, it's both interpersonal and systemic because the best of our faith traditions accomplish that. So on an interpersonal level, I believe that our faith leaders can help us experience a deeper sense of belonging and a deeper spiritual connection to one another across the country. So many folks in the US right now feel very isolated, feel very unseen and unheard, and feel very alone. And I think our faith traditions have lessons and guidance to help us through that. But I also think that Faith in Public Life is uniquely positioned to help us change systems and create a country where our human rights are held sacred. And so I know we'll talk a little bit later about sustainable development goals and some other things, but we are looking at faith leaders lifting up our voices in the public sphere to really change laws and policy and narrative and culture in such a way that it becomes normal for every person living in our country to feel that their human rights are sacred.
No, thanks for that. I have a question for you, because we also often talk during this podcast about leadership, and your situation is, I think, interesting, and a lot of people would be appreciate your opinion or your experience around this, because you are the first executive director after the founder, right? Because it was founded by Reverend Jennifer Butler.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah. And she's still on the board.
She's actually founder in residence. Yeah. So
okay.
She's staff person, founder in residence. Yeah.
Okay. So how is that? Because do you feel an enormous burden on your shoulders because you're the first one who moves this to the next level? How is that?
So it's transitions are challenging and tricky no matter how they come, but having Jen as founder in residence is a deep value and asset to Faith in Public Life. Not only because of her institutional knowledge, but also because of what she has contributed and is still contributing to the field. She had great vision to start Faith in Public Life, and still is speaking very eloquently and passionately against things like white Christian nationalism and other threats to our democracy and how our faith is being co-opted. So her presence in the organization helps us very much in the spirit of Sankofa to remember our past and remember our history and where we've come from, and also to help carry that forward with those lessons that we've learned. In terms of my leadership role, we have a clear distinction between the roles that we play. So the role that I play in leading the organization and making decisions about the future strategic direction, and the role that she plays in providing thought leadership and advising around how it can be relevant. That's been really important for us to work well together.
Right. No, and I think, and thank you for explaining that. I think that's really helpful for other leaders out there who are facing similar situations. Jeanné, is there anything you would like to lift up in terms of the organization or a project that you are working on? Is there anything?
Absolutely. So the legacy, the best value of Faith in Public Life has been our work on democracy and our democratic process, and helping faith leaders preserve the integrity of our democratic process, whether it's elections or laws that govern elections, and other aspects as well. So even though 2023 is not an election year in most places, it's still an activation year. We're still very, very active. We have staff in Florida, Georgia, and Ohio, and we also are partnering nationally with other groups to look at how we can make sure that our elections are safe. Legislation that's coming up in those states, both trying to put prohibitive bans around abortion access and holistic reproductive health care, and legislation that is restricting access to voters. We're fighting against both of those things across those states. So we're very active this year, engaging clergy and partners in doing that. And we invite anyone who's listening who would like resources and better understanding about how to talk about those issues from a faith perspective to sign up for our mailing list.
And is your organization mainly focusing on the US, or is it also global?
Yes, our organization is domestic, so we focus only on the US.
Yeah. And if not mistaken, is that still, when I did my homework properly, hopefully, you also pay a lot of attention to immigration issues. Is that correct?
So historically, we were very, very active
Mm-hmm.
around federal legislation, around immigration and some other legislation. We haven't worked on that issue in recent years, but we do still stay in touch with some partners who do.
Mm-hmm.
And so as certain unique issues pop up or particular legislation or particular court cases, we do monitor it,
Mm-hmm.
and we can activate our network from time to time if there's something specific to take action on.
Okay. Let me jump back to the elections. Yes, it's another year. But you already feel that a lot of things are happening, as you also alluded to. So, yeah, what is your biggest fear, of what could happen to this country? Because we have, and maybe are still experiencing a lot of polarization. So what do you hope, the faith in public life would contribute, within that process, that this country, really realizes this is one country and we need to do it together, whatever ultimately the result of the elections is, right?
Yeah. So I do worry that our country is trending towards violence. So something that Faith in Public Life has done for several election cycles is train clergy to be present at polling places on election days to help be peacekeepers or to help prevent violence before it starts. But unfortunately, I think in general, our country is trending towards violence. And I don't necessarily mind conflict, because I think it is necessary for us to wrestle and debate important questions and even critique strongly parts of our society that are not serving us well. But I recognize that there have been many leaders over the last several decades who've worked hard to stoke fear among folks in the United States. And when we're afraid, it becomes much harder to act as our best selves in alignment with our values. So I think fear and anger lead people to seek protection and to be vigilant, looking for threats, and to feel that the only way to protect themselves is violence. And so I'm seeing more people, both on an individual level and at a systemic level, considering violence when I don't think they would have before. And I think that violence extends to our language as well. So our faith traditions teach us the power of our words, and that our language, when it trends towards violence, also can support or undergird physical violence. All that said, I'm still very hopeful, because in my faith tradition and Christianity, and also in other faith traditions, I think we have so many beautiful lessons about how to navigate our fear and how to have courage, strength of the heart in place of fear. So I've been reflecting and praying quite a bit on Psalm 23, actually. The Lord is my shepherd, valley and shadow of death. Many people are familiar with that one. But what's beautiful about that Psalm is that it's not about retribution against enemies, but it's about safety and anointing and security, even in the presence of enemies. And I think that as human beings, we have the potential to help one another, even in the face of crisis and in the face of fear. We've seen that with some of the natural disasters happening recently, and even war and terrorist attacks. So I think we just need our faith leaders and our faith traditions to remind us how to do that, and tell us what the guides are. And Faith in Public Life helps faith leaders do that, to remind us to be courageous and loving despite our fear.
If there are clergy listening, religious leaders listening, and I would like to, get in contact with you, what should I do?
So please visit our website, faithinpubliclife.org. And again, you can sign up for our mailing list there around different particular issues, and stay involved in some of the things that we have coming up. You can also follow me on Twitter at Ms. Jeanné Lewis, although I will admit I'm not very active on Twitter, but I am very active when it comes to work. And you can follow Faith in Public Life on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook as well.
Great. And make sure that we also mentioned it in the notes of the podcast. Jeanné, in terms of other faiths, I mean, you don't only work with Christians,
Correct.
right? So it's anybody from any faith who is listening, who would like to work with you, collaborate, they should reach out.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. I would like to jump to the actual reason why I started this podcast. It's a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I've been doing since 2012, and actually I just finished my 11th 2 weeks ago. I'm still recovering from an injury that I got.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, my question to you is, if you would be asked to walk 100 mile in 5 to 7 days, which course would you walk? And which means 15 to 20 miles a day. Yeah.
So for me, it would be the right to vote and a free and fair electoral process. So it's great that Faith in Public Life is working on that. But it's very important to me. My grandparents on my mother's side are from Louisiana, and they experienced voter suppression in their lifetime. And I have worked at polling places and precincts in 3 different states as a precinct worker. I've witnessed discrimination at polling places against immigrants and returning citizens. And I've even been given misinformation when I've gone to vote. So those experiences led me to work as a precinct worker, and also led me in part to run for local office in Washington, D.C. in 2020. So I ran for city council in 2020. I would say running for office during a global pandemic probably feels about the same as walking 100 miles. I did not win the election, but I know that I did make a difference and was able to talk about some of the issues that are important to me and my community. But I would say that issue would motivate me to walk 100 miles. And when I was reflecting on this question, I thought about a quote that I heard once during a training on climate justice. I don't know who said it, so if someone listening knows who said this quote, please tell me. But the quote was, "If you are not prepared to govern, you are not prepared to be free." And that stood out to me because I think liberation from all the things that bind us, whether it's systems of oppression or even false narratives about ourselves and our self-worth, habits that harm us instead of nurture us. Liberation from these things is a spiritual act. It's how we get closer to behaving and existing as the divine beings that we are. So this quote says that liberation is a responsibility, governance is a responsibility to remember who we are and to make decisions for ourselves and others out of a place of freedom. So I strongly believe our vote is the entry point for how we govern ourselves. And so it's the entry point for our liberation.
What makes, you getting out of bed and.
Yeah. I optimistically believe in the potential of human beings. And I think there's a need to be honest with ourselves about where we are as a human race and not glide over it or pretend that there aren't challenges that face us. But we also need to be honest about the potential of who we can be. And what gets me out of bed is holding that paradox, holding that potential. I think there's so many wonderful entry points and issues that we can work on to make the world a better place. But I think many of those issues are important to me, but what really drives me is seeing human beings and seeing humanity get better and better every single day. That's what motivates me.
Going back to the walk for a second is, so I'm often accompanied for a couple of miles by different folks from local food banks or partner organizations. And then actually very often, if not always, we start talking about spirituality because there is something in walking, you start, first of all, I'm often thinking about, why am I doing this, for God's sake? But then, yeah, with the other, it's about religion, spirituality, and then very quickly about the younger generation. And are they different? Are they because especially maybe in Christianity, there are less people going to younger people going to church. Why is that? So my question that I have for you is what do you see happening among youth in your community in relation to faith?
The definition of youth is always slippery depending who you're talking about,
Mm,
but I'll just say I think young people are distrustful of institutions that previous generations relied on, and I think young people are right to be distrustful because so many of our institutions, including religious institutions, have not lived up to their ideals. And something that I think is an opportunity for us is that young people are less tolerant of that lack of integrity. I also see that young people are still very much committed to community, and they're very committed to building authentic relationships and making positive change. Um, and they see their spirituality as a way to do that. And by spirituality, I mean seeking deeper meaning for their lives and seeking authentic relationships. So we don't always recognize that orientation as spiritual, but I believe that's a deeply spiritual orientation. And I observe young people looking for communities and opportunities to live that way with integrity. I also think that our institutions are having an identity crisis right now. There's a choice in front of them, right? Whether to preserve their own existence as it always has been, or to evolve and grow to become even more relevant for this time. And so my hope for young people, even with this gift that they have of being honest and being intolerant of of this lack of integrity, my hope is that young people can also deepen in the spiritual discipline of grace, specifically how to stay in relationship, even with flawed people and institution, while offering grace, offering a level of forgiveness, but in a way that doesn't sacrifice being honest and unapologetic about what needs to change. And I think that is a spiritual discipline. It's something that has to be practiced. There's no right answer exactly how to do it every single time. And so my hope for young people is that they're already very spiritual, that can be more of their spiritual practice.
thanks for sharing that hope. Yeah, I have a question that is maybe beyond youth, but what are the things that you worry about most?
Yeah. I do worry about the violence that I mentioned earlier. So
Mm,
I think that I think just globally we're in a time of great change with COVID, and certainly in the United States, but really happening internationally. Governments are undergoing great change, and so that brings a level of uncertainty, it brings a level of fear. But my hope is that it doesn't bring deep, widespread violence. My hope is that we are able to learn our lessons and grow and evolve without the strong catalyst of deep, widespread violence. And so that is something that worries me. But I will say that I observe some folks wanting to prevent that violence and curtail that violence by any means necessary, even if it means ignoring injustice or sidelining issues. And I don't think that's the way. I don't think that's the path, because eventually those things will just keep coming back around. Um, so my hope is that at Faith in Public Life and other organizations, we can model ways to be really unapologetic and honest about what needs to change and about social justice, but give people a pathway that doesn't require violence.
yeah, when I think about hope, I get a lot of hope about the fact that as a world we worked on the sustainable development goals together. It's far from perfect, but at least we have a framework that we, it's a result of discussions, of different folks within the world. Again, it was not perfect, but it's what we have. My question to my guests is always, well, I know you were alluding to the SDGs already, so I know you know about the SDGs.
Yeah.
But what do you want the listeners to know about the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah. I think any framework that seeks to engage the complexity and acknowledge that we live in an ecosystem that affects one another, there's a potential for deep transformation and great change. And so I'm excited about the SDGs. I also think it's wonderful that they provide different entry points for people. So if you're passionate about the economy or about the climate or about education, there's a pathway for you to enter into the framework. So I think it's a strong framework. I think it's an exciting framework. But something that comes to mind when I look at the SDGs is that they threaten the status quo, right? Because it's this vision for a better world, which will require the status quo going away, particularly to those who hold power and privilege. And one of my favorite quotes is from Frederick Douglass, who was an American abolitionist. And he said, "Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will." So, living here in the United States, I have quite a bit of privilege when you compare my standard of living on a global scale. And I feel in myself sometimes mild resistance to give it up, even though I believe in these goals. And I think that's human nature. So as we work towards these goals, I think that we just need to be really honest in acknowledging our own human nature and that we fall short sometimes. Be gracious with one another about falling short sometimes, but really staying focused on the goal and pushing one another to navigate that discomfort towards these goals. But if we're not gracious with each other and just sort of acknowledging our own human nature, I think it'll be hard to sustain the change.
Piggybacking a little bit about your comment on falling short on the SDGs, and we are, if the latest report is saying, well, we need to step it up. There is a growing number of people that is saying that one of the reasons that we are not making the progress on these SDGs that we need to make is because we do not pay proper attention to the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we need as an individual and as a community. And they did a survey, and then they came up with inner development goals. So there are 5 goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and action. And my question to you is, have you heard about the inner development goals? And then the second part of the question is, when you hear me talk about these inner development goals, does it make sense to you in terms of that they are required, beside the SDGs?
Yeah, I was not familiar with them until we were going to have this conversation. So I did a little research, and again, it's a holistic framework. And certainly as a contemplative Christian, it's very familiar. They seem similar to the values that I hold and that I know other faith traditions hold in terms of understanding self and relationship to other human beings. So I think that there is potential there. I do think it's necessary for us as individuals to do our own work in terms of understanding ourselves and our relationship to others. But I don't think that is the only solution to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Again, referencing my quote from Frederick Douglass about power, I think even if all of us have a spiritual or mental or emotional shift and want something else, there's still those who stand to lose from shifting the status quo. And that is a systemic wrestling that needs to happen. And there needs to be enough of a demand from all of us that we want a different way of life to confront the current status quo. So I do think the inner development goals are a great opportunity. It's a strong framework, and I agree with everything that's there. Those are things we should practice. But I would not say that they are a replacement for doing social justice work and paying attention to systems change.
Okay. One of the things that I try to do with this podcast is also connect people. You know, I'm connecting you with the listeners. I would also like to connect you with my previous guest who has a question for you.
What are you accepting as doctrine of our economic system that ought to be questioned for the sake of human dignity?
I think that is an excellent question and a complex question. I would say there is an assumption and a narrative in the US that if you work hard enough, you'll be okay, you'll be able to survive and have what you need. But the unspoken rule of our economy is that each person's economic stability in the US functions a little bit like a gamble, like a game of chance. The more money you have to risk, the higher your potential reward. And whether it's conscious or unconscious, people know that. They know that. So there are many folks in the US, particularly people from lower economic statuses, that say they don't trust parts of our economic system. And I think it's because we don't trust casinos to have our best interests in mind, right? So to solve that, I don't think there's an easy solution because we all participate in this current extractive version of capitalism that we have in the United States. It continues because we participate. And this is related to what I was saying earlier about the inner development goals. I know I certainly benefit from it because I have advanced degrees and I have a 401k and I own my home. It requires a culture shift at a massive scale. So one of the things that I'm doing, I'm a part of a few cooperatively owned businesses. One is a grocery co-op, and another is a bank that I'm a part of. And I will say it's hard, particularly to be an owner, a cooperative owner of a business. It's really hard to do things differently. But I do think that making more cooperative models of building wealth available in the US can help promote that culture change and expand people's thinking about what economies can look like in a healthy and positive way. And I think that diversity in the economic system can help create the conditions for a healthier expression of capitalism than what we have now.
Your question for the next guest.
Oh my, I'm gonna need a minute on this one.
Take your time.
Okay. My question for the next guest is, what do they believe the biggest cultural influence is right now in the United States? And what do they believe can impact it?
Right. Jeanné, I would like to because, you know, working on injustice and inequity within the US is a very important part of your work, you know, and of who you are as a person as well. I mean, that's what I understood so far. If we look at racial justice issues and our sector, the NGO sector, how do you think we did? And I know it's, you know, it's difficult to, you know, to generalize, right? It's a whole sector, but still give some thoughts there.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna cheat and limit it a little bit to the United States, not the whole NGO sector, global, and even that is very broad. Mm-hmm. So I think that racism is embedded in the DNA and the culture of the United States. It's a part of the water that we swim in, and therefore it's a part of the water of the nonprofit sector, the NGO sector. And we all carry that lens, that it's a filter through which all of us see. And so throughout my career, there are more and more organizations who are explicitly working to end racism, or at least to be aware of how racism has impacted their work. But I would say for the better part of the 20th century, when the NGO sector here in the US really was being built, that was not the case. So it's hard for any organization, any institution who is not able to recognize or see or acknowledge racism in society or even within the institution to correct it. So I think we have a long way to go still. That said, I think in the 21st century, we're in a much better place now. We have better language around what's going on. We have more academic work to help us understand what's going on, and we have more practices to help repair it. Something that I think we need to pay attention to as we go forward is recognizing racism as a really fundamental part of our culture, but not the definition of who we are as human beings. And that's why working at a faith-based organization and still working on anti-racism and social justice is a really important piece for me, because it allows me and our organization to talk about who we are as spiritual beings while we are addressing racism and other injustices in our world. But we have a long way to go as a sector, I would say.
Hey, music is very important to me, so I always have a music-related question as well. If I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song which best describes, best embodies who you are, for a big part, which song or piece of music would that be and why?
Maurice, I love this question. So one of my hobbies is I'm a singer. I sing in a group called Songrise, which is also a nonprofit organization. And we are a women's a cappella group who sings social justice music in the DC area. So I love this question. And I have to give you two songs because I love music so much. I couldn't narrow it. So the first song is I Am Light by India Ari.
Oh, cool.
And I love this song because it reminds me fundamentally of who we are, who I am and who we all are. I can get so distracted by, superficial aspects of myself or problems that arise and forget myself. But at the end of the day, we're all beloved children of God, full of light. So it's a very simple song, but it's very profound, which is why it's such a powerful reminder. The other song that I chose is Rise Up by Andra Day. And this song is about resilience, but not just for one's own sake. It's about being resilient for each other and being present to encourage one another. So that resilience and reliance on one another is our strength. At the end of the song, she repeats the phrase, we will rise, we will rise. So it's about rising up together, especially in the face of adversity.
Both those songs are on my playlist. Yes, that is great. Just for you and the listeners as well, a reminder that we've made a playlist of this podcast called #WalkTalkListen, and all the songs that are picked by my guests you can find, and it is from classical music to soul to hard rock, heavy metal, nice. To folk. So I always enjoy it, listening to it, because it reminds me of the great guests that I've had. Hey, Steve Hartman of CBS, he started to examine the simple act of kindness and its rippling effect. potential rippling effect. And I don't know if that's on television or online. I have two questions around this to you. Is that what do you think about the potential of a simple act of kindness and its rippling effect? That's one part of the question. The second part is, if I ask you this week to do a simple act of kindness, what would you do?
I do think that kindness can be very powerful in transformation. I myself have experienced small acts and deep acts of kindness, and I've seen the change in a person's demeanor or their attitude when I've been unusually kind to them. So I agree. I think it can be extremely powerful. If I were to do an act of kindness this week, so I'm recently married. I got married in September of last year, and I often think about how to do simple things with great love to demonstrate to my husband that I love him, particularly if I'm feeling frustrated or if I don't feel like doing it. So I think if I were to do an act of kindness, I might do something like clean out his car, or maybe pick up trash that has blown sort of on the sidewalk or the grass near our house, either for around his car or maybe near my neighbor's house.
Great. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
And in terms of picking up garbage, if you, for the listeners who haven't checked out a previous episode, I mean the I think now I have to think. There is an episode with Josh Spodek, who went off the grid. I think now 8 or 9 months ago, lives in New York. But he talks a lot about, garbage and his footprint, of course. I think it's really inspiring and to listen to him. His efforts in trying to motivate others also by his behavior. Thanks for mentioning that. These conversations always go fast. Still, any message, invitation, question for the listeners?
I am excited that folks are listening to this podcast and thinking more carefully about how we connect. And I would say Faith in Public Life is very much aligned with that. So my invitation is that if you are a faith leader of any religious tradition here in the US and you want to be in a community, in a network with other folks who want to make the world a better place, particularly as it pertains to our democracy and a healthy democratic process, please do visit our website at faithinpubliclife.org and sign up for our mailing list. We have lots of opportunities to engage. And I also want to encourage everyone and remind one another that even though things may be challenging at times, I hope that we can all remember that we are related to each other, and that we are loved of God, and that when we remember that, we can love each other better.
Thank you for that. Any question that I should have asked you, which I didn't?
No, you asked excellent questions, Maurice. And I think that I was able to share everything I wanted to share today.
Great. And one quick last question, because you said you're also part of the a cappella group.
Yes.
So can people listen to your songs or to your performances?
Yes. If you are in the Washington, D.C. area, we only perform locally. You can come to some of our live performances. We do 2 concerts a year. But if you are a social justice group and you're hosting an event and you need free entertainment, just let us know. And if we're available, we will come and sing at your event for free. You can also listen to our music on YouTube, and I'll share the links with you, Maurice, to put in the show notes.
Great. And the name of the group?
Songrise.
Sunrise. Okay, great. Hey, thank you so much, Jeanné, for today, for sharing your wisdom, for who you are, and yeah, absolutely great. Thank you so much, and good luck with. Well, it's not a new job. You've been doing it for 9 months, but now it's really official, right? So yeah, all the best for that.
Thank you, Maurice, for inviting me. And I will say I love to walk. So next time you go on your walk, if you need someone to walk with you part of the way, not the whole way, I'd be happy to join you.
Great. I will hold you to that.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.